You know, it's obvious what the readings are about. Okay, let me just check how obvious they are. From one person, Gunther, what are the readings about?
It's about a man and the woman, so that they take it from the man, so the woman becomes one flesh with the man.
Oh, great. Man and woman, God created them, they become one flesh, and that's okay. And that's marriage. We call it marriage. They didn't call it marriage. We call it marriage. We'll talk about that in a second. First of all, we get so almost fundamentalistic sometimes when we read the scriptures. There are various readings that describe creation. The old world had what they call priestly readers, priestly writers, Yahwist writers, unknown writers. And when the scriptures were finally put together, all the oral traditions that had been in existence of the Jewish people for hundreds of years were put together. So around 1000, the readings were all put together as readings. Before that, they were oral traditions. So that's why sometimes there's a little, discrepancy in the scriptures, because they weren't all written at the same time under the same aegis. So we have these various readings. And it's good for us to know that our scriptures are not written with one cycle in mind, one uniform thought in mind. But one of the thoughts, because we're so fundamentalistic, and we shouldn't be, is beautiful reading from Genesis. God took out a rib from Adam, and God didn't take out a rib. God didn't do an operation. That didn't happen. We know that. This is called theological mythology. Theological mythology, which means it's how we thought it happened according to our faith, but we didn't make it up. Someone passed it on from the origins of our Jewish ancestors, but no one made it up out of the sky. You could just imagine, like, you're all sitting around, I mean, you're campers, you're people who are in motion, you're the Israelites, you haven't yet gotten to the promised land. It's 40 generations across in the desert. So all the hundreds of Israelites are in little tribes. And you can see one grandfather. Who's old enough to be a grandfather here? Anybody old enough to be a grandfather? Okay, no one here is old enough to be a grandfather. So just the patriarch of that particular clan sits around the fire, and I can just see one of the kids, and if Timka was here today, he's home sleeping, but if Timka here, he'd raise his hand, and he'd ask a question like, how did this all start? How do we get, here we are in a desert, and the kid could have been born in the desert, because generations of escape from Egypt to the Holy Land. And I could see the patriarch saying, well, in the beginning, there was nothing. See, look up there. There was nothing. God said, boof, let it be. And his word was strong enough to let it be. Oh, I can see. And now, this is a patriarch. He doesn't have books. He doesn't have resources. He doesn't have Google. He doesn't have any of that stuff that you and I depend on. And he's exclaiming what he believes came down to him from his ancestors. So he said, everything you see around you, God made out of nothing. Well, I can see the kids say, well, how did he make people? Well, and there's various stories in the scriptures in Genesis, so you can read those yourselves, but I'll just take one of them that's very famous, very popular. Well, okay, see all the clay that's over here, and see how little Mabel was making little houses there, and little Johnny was making little people there out of mud and clay? Yeah. Well, God did that. Now, don't forget, this is theological mythology. It's trying to get into how did it all happen? And I can see the patriarch saying, well, God created a big form, and it was a man. And then after he created this man, he let him walk around. And then he figured, well, the man's alone, so he'll make cats and dogs and lions and bears and tigers and elephants. Wow, that's great. But how? I can see little kids saying, but how is the man going to have a boy or a girl? How's the man going to have a child? Oh, okay, good point. God reaches in and takes the essence of man, not the rib. It's not an operation. The essence, the same word, rib, it means essence. He takes the essence of man, and the kid didn't have to ask what that meant. He knew what it meant. And he made a woman out of it. And he said, these two are equal. Now, this kid is looking around at his tribe and seeing mothers and fathers and kids and grandchildren. Oh, that makes sense. And he said, all of them, this man, this woman, will go off and have little kids, and these kids are to be part of that family forever. And this man and this woman are of one flesh. You heard how God made the story. God made them. He made them one flesh. Although there's two people, there's one. When they get together, they're one flesh. Very simplistic, very simple, very direct. And accurate, theologically, yes. Scientifically, no. Not by a long shot. But we don't know. Who knows? Someday, at the end of the time, God will say, they had it right all along. But we don't have to go there. So today's readings are obviously about man and woman, as Gunther said, man, woman, God making them one flesh. Let's fast forward to the 21st century. And let's look at Jesus at the end of this section of Mark's gospel, after he's already been cornered by the Pharisees, the lovely Pharisees, always trying to get Jesus, always trying to back him into the corner. Because, and Jesus said, well, Moses wrote that law that you guys can divorce one another because you just kabados, you get hard-headed. That's exactly what he said. See, if this was in Italian, you'd hear, because they were kabados, they were hard-headed. So he says it in English, they were hard-headed, hard to understand. And they didn't get along, so Moses said, let them divorce. Now this is a really, today's the Women's March on Washington, and it shouldn't be a woman's march for the right of her body to have an abortion. I think it should be a women's march for their rights and their uniqueness as the role they play in society and in our families, okay? And regrettably, those big marches get tilted and they get skewed and they have one political theme, but we're not going there. So he looks at women as possessions. Moses, as possessions. Don't forget, these children that came to Jesus, Jesus, they come over, the parent, and the apostle said, no, don't bother Jesus. Like, get away from me, little kids, you bother me. Well, that wasn't Jesus. That was the apostles and the comedians. But children had no value. Their value was when they grew up, they could work in the fields. Women's values, girls' values, when they grew up, they could be used as a bargaining chip to marry into another family and make more children to take care of the fields. Now, am I judging that? No, it'd be stupid to judge the past. Their criteria is their criteria. But we've grown out of that. And in some civilizations we have, and female trafficking and children trafficking is a curse on our society throughout the world. So there's some elements of antiquity that are still being held on to. Get away from that. That's not our focus. So the story continues, and Moses says, okay, guys, you're in charge of your households. If you don't like what your wife cooked tonight, you can divorce her. And literally, it was that simple. If you didn't like what she cooked, you can write her a get, they called it, a get. It was a bill of divorce, and you could divorce her. Forget her role in the family, forget her role as mother, forget any of her instructional, educational roles, and mothers do all of that very well, and number one in every family. But Moses said, because you're hard-headed, he said, we can have divorces. And of course, Jesus makes it very clear, because you're hard-headed. However, the new law, Jesus, changes that and talks about when a man commits to a woman in marriage, think of the word, commit. Commit, give themselves to each other. To the point where, as God said in the beginning, they're one, not two, they're one. This past weekend I have another tonight. I have a renewal of promises of marriage, a COVID marriage, so it's a redo. But over the weekend, it was another, Kim and Kyle, members of my extended family. And one of the promises I asked her, Kyle, Kim, because of Kevin, who's her father-in-law, I said, would you accept children lovingly from God? Yes, yes. And give Kevin his grandchildren, because Kevin wants grandchildren. See, that's the continuity of the family. And that's where it comes from God. From Jesus saying, love is very special. You know, love is not sex. You can have sex with anything or anyone. That's not love. And Jesus wants to make that very clear. When you have the sexual intercourse, it's so uniquely God-given that it's special. And you should be one with that person. And you should be one with that person forever. Because if things go well, according to biology, you're going to have a child. And that unity is very important for God. That unity. There are a lot of problems in our streets. There are a lot of problems in our homes. There are a lot of divorces. But let me tell you, the answer comes from home. It all goes back to home. How we were raised. How honest were our parents with us? How clear? Did they understand us? Did they allow us to express ourselves? And if my parents didn't do that for me, well then today, 21st century, it's my job, if I'm getting into a relationship, to understand my children, my grandchildren, my ancestors, my nieces and nephews. Because I have a different mindset than our ancestors did. And my mindset is not anything goes. My mindset always starts with Christ, who unites us. It starts at home. This weekend, regrettably, the news this morning, waking up, what do I hear? Several murders and shootings over this past weekend in this whole metropolitan area. The perpetrators and the victims, teenagers. Teenagers. Tell me it doesn't begin at home. That's where unity, marriage, love, fidelity, contentment begin. And if I don't see it with my parents, well, folks, the parents here, you got a job to do. And it doesn't end, I don't care how tall they are. It doesn't end when they're adults. You continue. But don't be phonies. Don't forget, Jesus doesn't like hypocrites. And the Pharisees are very hypocritical in their actions toward Jesus. And he's asking us to realize that because he doesn't expect us to be hypocrites. We've got to be faithful. And different styles. Some people push religion down the kids' throats until they vomit it up and then they grow up to be atheists. Some people honestly practice their faith at home. Every one of us has to ask ourselves, which means the dignity of prayer goes throughout my relationship, not just at the table or not just at the bed before I go to bed. Because you could tell the kids to pray, 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 and you go off and screw up like crazy outside, and you cheat and you lie and you do things that are disgraceful to the Christian ethic, and the kids see that. Great education. Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. Now I know I don't have to respect anybody because you don't respect anybody. I'm not just making this up. At the baptismal ritual, remember, if you don't remember your own baptisms or your children's baptisms, go back and look it up online, the Catholic ritual of baptism in the Catholic Church. One of the questions that the priest asks the parents, are you willing to be the best and first parents of this child in the ways of faith and life? Because you are the best, parents I'm talking to now, you are the best and you can be the worst. Believe me. Kids who are shooting each other up on the streets, they didn't learn that on TV. Oh yeah, some of it's TV, some of it's liberal media, some of it's this, some of it's that. But it's home where the lack of trust, lack of respect, lack of love begins. And if the child does not see it with his parents, it's gone. He's lost. And some people, thank God they have the strength to do this. Some people, the kids grow up in screwy, dysfunctional families, and some without a mother or father, okay? But they themselves, the kids themselves, have the integrity to hold on to faith and to pray and to get closer to God and closer to one person in his or her life that they can trust and relate to. There's always that hope. So dysfunctional people, you got a lot of work to do. And the best thing to do is not to pass that dysfunction on to your kids. But for the kids of us, whatever age that is, you are that child that was brought over to Jesus. And now you realize why the apostles were saying, get away, kids, get away, kids. Remember W.C. Field? The only thing he hated more than dogs, little puppies, is kids. That was a joke W.C. Fields was famous for. He was a miserable person, not as a person, but as a comedian saying that kind of stuff. But he showed that miserable personality as a comedy to wake us up. Children were worthless in the time of Jesus. Now think of this. This is the healer. This is the rabbi. This is the famous one. This is the one who's making water into wine. This is the one who's walking on the waters, making bread when we don't have any. And, whoa, keep him apart. Separate him because he's holy. Don't let those dirty little kids come near Jesus. And Jesus says, he reprimands his apostles, becomes indignant toward them, and says, let the children come to me. You and I are those children. None of us are less than the creation of God. Every one of us. Every one of us. And I love this church, as you know, I've said it a million times, because of your diversity in this parish. There is no one in this building less than anyone else, whether it's a child or senior citizen. There's none of us. And Jesus makes that very clear. We are all permitted and encouraged and invited to go to him. And unless we accept one another as he educated us to accept, we're not there. We're not finished. Unless we really respect one another, love one another, and appreciate our diversity, we're not there. We're not invited to the kingdom of God. Basically, Jesus saying in between the words, in between the lines, if you don't love one another as I love these kids, go to hell, because I don't want you in my kingdom. So any of us who has a splinter of prejudice and hate in our hearts, go to hell. You don't belong here. Although Christ did come for sinners, so you're welcome here. Don't forget that piece. This is not Louis telling you to go to hell. This is your conscience telling you to go to hell. And know, on the other side, every one of us is welcomed into the kingdom. And we, as those of you who are parents, you're welcomed with a great gift, your children, and a great burden, the education of those children. Jesus is our Lord and our brother and the law. Forget Moses. Forget all those commandments. 760 commandments. Nah. One, love the Lord your God with your whole heart and your neighbor as yourself. Without that, we can't go wrong. With that, we can't go wrong. Without that, we're going wrong big time.